The bustling atmosphere of LAX Airport filled the terminal on a sunny California morning, as travelers rushed to their destinations with rolling suitcases and carry-on bags in tow. Among the crowd, a bright-eyed 8-year-old girl named Maya Chen stood patiently in the security line with her mother, her small fingers wrapped tightly around a well-loved copy of Space Science for Young Minds. Maya's NASA t-shirt, slightly too big for her small frame, hung loosely over her jeans. She'd begged her mother to buy it during their visit to the California Science Center last month. Her eyes sparkled with excitement as she watched the planes take off through the massive terminal windows, imagining herself piloting a spacecraft someday instead of an airplane. As they inched forward in the security line, Maya whispered to her mother, "Mom, did you know that astronauts have to train underwater to get ready for space?" Her mother smiled warmly, adjusting Maya's backpack strap. "That's amazing, sweetie. Maybe you'll do that someday too." The morning crowd continued to grow, with business people checking their watches and families trying to keep their children entertained. Maya kept herself busy by reading facts from her book to her mother, occasionally drawing curious smiles from nearby passengers who couldn't help but be charmed by her enthusiasm for space exploration. The air conditioning hummed overhead as they finally approached the front of the line. Maya could see the security officers directing people through the metal detectors, their blue TSA uniforms crisp and official looking. She stood up straighter, wanting to look professional like the scientist in her book. Just a few spots ahead, Maya noticed a familiar face, someone she'd seen in movies her parents watched. It was Dwayne Johnson, known to most as The Rock, waiting in line just like everyone else. She tugged on her mother's sleeve excitedly, but remembered what her mom had taught her about respecting people's privacy in public. The morning light streamed through the huge airport windows, creating long shadows across the terminal floor. Maya practiced the speech she prepared for her upcoming science presentation in her head, imagining herself teaching others about the stars and planets she loved learning about. As they got closer to the security checkpoint, Maya noticed a new officer taking his position. Officer Thompson adjusted his uniform and began directing passengers with sharp, quick gestures. Something about his demeanor made Maya hold her book a little tighter, and she moved slightly closer to her mother's side. The air felt different now, heavier somehow, as Officer Thompson's gaze landed on Maya and her mother. His expression changed in a way that Maya didn't understand, but it made her stomach feel funny. Not the good kind of funny like when she thought about space adventures, but the uncomfortable kind that told her something wasn't quite right. What started as an ordinary morning at LAX was about to become something much more significant. A moment that would not only test Maya's courage, but also show how one person's brave stance against unfairness could inspire others to speak up, even in the most unexpected places. Little did Maya know that her simple trip through airport security would soon turn into an encounter that would teach her more about standing up for what's right than any book ever could. The familiar routine of airport security was about to become anything but ordinary, as Maya's dream of reaching the stars would intersect with a reality that sometimes kept people's feet too firmly on the ground. Yet in the face of what was to come, her spirit would shine as brightly as the celestial bodies she loved to study. Officer Thompson's voice cut through the regular airport noise like a sharp knife. "You two, step aside," he commanded, pointing at Maya and her mother while barely looking at their passports. Other travelers continued moving through the line, giving awkward glances as they passed by. Maya's mother held their documents firmly, her hand steady, even though her voice shook slightly. "Is there a problem, officer? We have all our required documentation right here." She held out their perfectly valid U.S. passports, the blue covers crisp and official under the fluorescent lights. "We need to do some additional verification," Officer Thompson said, his tone making it clear he wasn't making a friendly request. "You know, we have to be extra careful with certain people." He let the words hang in the air, their meaning clear to everyone within earshot. Maya looked up at her mother, confusion clouding her usually bright face. She'd been through airports before, They traveled to visit her grandparents in San Francisco every summer. But this felt different. The NASA logo on her shirt suddenly felt heavy, as if it was weighing her down instead of lifting her up toward her dreams. "But we were born here," Maya said softly, her voice smaller than usual, but still clear. "I was born in California. Look, it says so right here in my passport." She pointed to the information page, trying to be helpful like her teachers had taught her to be. Officer Thompson barely glanced at the passport. "Yeah, well, these days you can't be too sure about documentation. Some people are very clever with their paperwork." He emphasized the word clever in a way that made several nearby passengers shift uncomfortably. The security line continued moving around them, but Maya and her mother remained stuck in this bubble of tension. Maya clutched her science book closer to her chest, as if it could shield her from what was happening. A few feet away, a family hurried past, the parents pulling their children closer and avoiding eye contact. "I'll need to see additional identification," Officer Thompson continued, his voice getting louder. "And we'll have to do a complete bag check. Maybe even make some calls to verify a few things." He picked up Maya's mother's passport again, flipping through it with exaggerated scrutiny. Maya's mother took out her phone, her movements calm but purposeful. "I'm going to record this interaction," she announced clearly, holding the phone steady. "I believe we're being singled out unfairly, and I want to document this." The surrounding air grew thick with tension. Other passengers now openly stared, some pulling out their own phones, others whispering to each other. A young couple in line exchanged concerned looks, while a businessman in a suit pretended to be deeply absorbed in his laptop. Officer Thompson's face reddened slightly, but he doubled down. "Recording won't change anything. We have procedures here, and I'm just following them." But his eyes darted nervously to the growing number of witnesses, including one very familiar face just a few feet away. Maya felt tears forming in her eyes, but she blinked them back. She thought about the astronauts in her book, how they faced challenges with bravery. Her small fingers traced the cover of her science book, finding comfort in its familiar texture. She hadn't done anything wrong. She was just a kid who loved space and science, trying to get through security with her mom. The situation was about to shift dramatically, though Maya didn't know it yet. Just a few feet away, someone had been watching this entire scene unfold. Someone who knew exactly what it felt like to be judged unfairly, and who wasn't about to stand by quietly while it happened to a brave little girl and her mother. The morning light continued to stream through the airport windows, but the warmth Maya had felt earlier had been replaced by a cold knot in her stomach. Still, she stood tall beside her mother, her NASA shirt a reminder of everything she dreamed of becoming, no matter what anyone else thought she could or couldn't be. Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson had been observing the scene unfold while waiting in the security line, his eyes narrowing with each passing moment. Despite his towering presence, he'd managed to stay relatively unnoticed, his focus entirely on the unfolding situation with Maya and her mother. He watched as Maya held onto her science book, noticing how she tried to stand tall even as her shoulders slightly trembled. The sight stirred something deep within him. Memories of his own childhood experiences with prejudice, times when people had made assumptions based on nothing but appearances. The familiar weight of his own travel bag hung from his shoulder as he observed Officer Thompson's body language, the dismissive way he handled their passports, and the coded language he used. As a person who had faced his share of stereotypes throughout his life, The Rock could read between the lines of every carefully chosen word. "You know what gets me?" he thought to himself, watching Maya's brave attempt to explain her California birth to the officer. This kid isn't thinking about anything except her dreams of space, and someone's trying to make her feel like she doesn't belong here. He noticed other passengers' reactions, the uncomfortable shuffling, the averted gazes, the whispered conversations. Some pulled out their phones to record, but nobody stepped forward. The Rock had seen this scene play out too many times before. Good people staying silent, unsure of how to help or afraid to get involved. Maya's NASA t-shirt caught his eye again. He remembered being her age, having his own big dreams, and facing people who tried to put limits on those dreams. The difference was, he'd had people in his corner who stood up for him, who taught him that he belonged anywhere his dreams could take him. The security line moved forward slightly, but the Rock stayed where he was, his jaw set in determination. He watched as Maya's mother started recording the interaction, her hands steady even as her voice trembled slightly with controlled anger. He saw the fire of protection in her eyes, a mother trying to shield her child while maintaining her dignity. Officer Thompson's dismissive tone echoed through the security area. These procedures are for everyone's safety. But the Rock knew better. He'd heard those kinds of explanations before, had seen how bias could hide behind official-sounding words and regulations. The morning sun streaming through the airport windows cast long shadows across the floor, and the Rock could see Maya's shadow, small but straight-backed, still holding onto her book like a shield. In that moment, he saw more than just a little girl being unfairly treated. He saw every kid who'd ever been made to feel less than because of who they were or how they looked. He adjusted his cap, took a deep breath, and made his decision. Sometimes life puts you in a position where you can either be a bystander or take a stand. And if there's one thing Dwayne Johnson had learned throughout his career, it was that real strength isn't just about physical power. It's about using your voice when others can't use theirs. As he prepared to step forward, he caught Maya's eye for just a moment. She looked at him with a mix of recognition and hope, and in that brief exchange, he saw something that strengthened his resolve even further, the unshakable spirit of a child who refused to let anyone dim her light. The buzz of airport announcements and shuffling feet faded into background noise as the Rock made his way toward the security checkpoint. He wasn't just walking up to help a stranger. He was walking up to stand against something he'd seen too many times before. And this time, he had the platform and the voice to make sure it didn't go unchallenged. Maya's story was about to intersect with his in a way that would remind everyone watching that sometimes the most powerful moments happen not in wrestling rings or movie sets, but in ordinary places where ordinary people choose to do the right thing. The Rock knew that what happened next would matter, not just for Maya and her mother, but for everyone watching who needed to see that standing up against unfairness was everyone's responsibility. The tension at the security checkpoint reached a new level as Officer Thompson's voice grew louder, his accusations becoming more direct. These documents could be fraudulent, he declared, holding Maya's mother's passport up to the light with exaggerated suspicion. We see this kind of thing all the time. Maya's mother's phone stayed steady as she continued recording, her other hand protectively touching Maya's shoulder. I'm an American citizen, and so is my daughter, she stated firmly, her voice carrying the weight of dignity despite the humiliation being forced upon them. You have no right to treat us this way. Around them, the crowd of onlookers had grown. Some pulled out their phones to record, while others whispered among themselves. A young couple nearby looked distressed, the woman wiping tears from her eyes as she watched the scene unfold. An elderly gentleman in a business suit shook his head disapprovingly at Officer Thompson's behavior. Maya still clutched her science book, but now tears rolled silently down her cheeks. She thought about the chapter she'd just read about astronauts facing challenges in space, how they had to be brave and calm even when things got difficult. She tried to channel that same courage now, even as her dreams of space seemed suddenly far away. Maybe we should call immigration, Officer Thompson suggested, his words hanging threateningly in the air. Just to be absolutely certain about everything. He reached for his radio, making a show of his authority while other TSA officers nearby shifted uncomfortably, clearly aware that their colleague was overstepping. The morning sunlight streaming through the terminal windows now felt harsh and exposing. Maya's mother took a deep breath, her voice shaking slightly but growing stronger with each word. You're racially profiling us, and I want to speak to your supervisor immediately. This is being recorded, and your behavior is completely unacceptable. Other passengers in line began to voice their support. "This isn't right," someone called out. "They're American citizens," another added. The murmurs of disapproval grew louder, but Officer Thompson seemed determined to maintain his position of authority, even as it clearly crumbled around him. Maya looked down at her NASA shirt, her vision blurry with tears. She remembered how excited she'd been to wear it today, how proud she felt telling people about her dreams of becoming an astronaut. Now she just wanted to disappear, to escape the stares and the tension that filled the air around them. Her mother's phone continued recording as she spoke clearly into it, documenting everything. "Today is December 15th, 2024, at LAX Airport. We're being detained and harassed by TSA Officer Thompson, badge number 47,892, who is refusing to accept our valid U.S. passports and making discriminatory comments." The air in the terminal felt heavy and thick with tension. Other security officers began glancing nervously at each other, aware that the situation was spiraling out of control. Passengers who had already passed through security stopped to watch, creating a growing crowd of witnesses to this display of prejudice. Through her tears, Maya noticed movement in the crowd. Someone was stepping forward, someone whose presence seemed to make everyone around them stand a little straighter, pay a little more attention. She couldn't quite see who it was through her blur of tears, but she could feel the shift in the atmosphere, like the moment before a storm breaks. Officer Thompson was still talking, still making his accusations, but his voice had lost some of its certainty. Perhaps he too sensed the change in the air, the way the crowd had suddenly focused on something, or someone, behind him. The morning light caught the badge on his uniform, making it flash briefly, like a warning signal ignored. Maya wiped her eyes with the back of her hand, trying to be brave like the astronauts in her book. She didn't know it yet, but in just a few moments, this horrible situation would take an unexpected turn. One that would remind everyone watching that sometimes heroes don't wear capes or spacesuits, but they show up exactly when they're needed most. "Excuse me," a deep, familiar voice cut through the tension. The crowd parted as Dwayne "The Rock" Johnson stepped forward, his presence commanding immediate attention. He moved with purpose, his expression serious but controlled as he approached Officer Thompson. The once noisy terminal grew oddly quiet. Even the regular airport announcements seemed muted as The Rock positioned himself near Maya and her mother. Officer Thompson's eyes widened with recognition, his hand dropping from his radio as he realized who was addressing him. "I've been watching this whole situation unfold," The Rock began, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable weight. "And I've got to ask, what exactly about these valid U.S. passports isn't clear to you?" He gestured toward the documents that Officer Thompson still held in his hands. Maya watched in amazement as The Rock continued, sharing his own experiences. "You know, I've traveled through hundreds of airports. I've seen this kind of treatment before. People being singled out, made to feel like they don't belong. And let me tell you something." He paused, making sure Officer Thompson was looking him in the eye. "This little girl right here," he gestured to Maya, "she's wearing a NASA shirt because she dreams of being an astronaut. But instead of encouraging that dream, you're teaching her that some people will try to put limits on it based on how she looks." Officer Thompson shifted uncomfortably, struggling to maintain his authority in the face of such a powerful presence. "Sir, I'm just following protocol," he began, but The Rock raised his hand, cutting him off. "Let's talk about protocol," The Rock said, his voice gaining intensity but never losing its composure. "I've faced discrimination myself. I know what it looks like when someone uses protocol as a shield for bias, and that's exactly what's happening here." The growing crowd of onlookers nodded in agreement. Phones continued recording as The Rock spoke about his own journey, about the times people had tried to put him in a box to limit what he could achieve. His words resonated through the terminal, touching everyone who had ever felt judged unfairly. Maya's tears had stopped now, replaced by a look of wonder as she watched someone she'd seen in movies standing up for her. Her mother's phone kept recording, capturing this moment when someone with a powerful voice chose to use it for those who needed support. "Here's what's going to happen," The Rock continued, his tone leaving no room for argument. "You're going to process their valid passports just like you would for any other American citizen. And then you're going to think about how you can do better tomorrow than you did today." Other TSA officers had started moving closer, recognizing that the situation needed to be addressed. Officer Thompson's face had gone from red to pale, the reality of his actions, and their very public witnessing, finally sinking in. The Rock turned to Maya, his expression softening. "And you," he said gently, "don't let anyone dim your light. Those stars you're reaching for, they belong to everyone." He pointed to her NASA shirt, offering a warm smile that made her stand a little straighter. The morning sun still streamed through the terminal windows, but now it felt different, warmer, more hopeful. The crowd of witnesses had grown larger, many wiping tears from their eyes as they watched this unexpected moment of justice and kindness unfold in the most ordinary of places. Officer Thompson looked down at the passports in his hands, then back up at the scene before him. A famous actor standing beside a little girl in a NASA shirt and her mother, surrounded by a crowd of people who had just witnessed a powerful lesson about standing up for what's right. The air in the terminal had changed. What had started as a moment of discrimination had transformed into something else entirely. A reminder that sometimes the most important victories happen not in courtrooms or on stages, but in everyday moments when people choose to speak up instead of staying silent. Within minutes of The Rock's intervention, a senior TSA supervisor hurried toward the scene, her steps quick and purposeful. She'd been alerted by other officers who had recognized not just the famous actor, but also the seriousness of the situation unfolding at their checkpoint. The supervisor, wearing a crisp uniform with the name Officer Chen on her badge, took in the scene before her. The Rock standing protectively near Maya and her mother, Officer Thompson looking increasingly uncomfortable, and the crowd of passengers recording everything on their phones. "I apologize for any distress this has caused," Officer Chen said immediately, addressing Maya and her mother directly. Her voice carried both authority and genuine concern. "This is not how we train our officers to conduct screenings, and this is not what TSA stands for." Maya wiped the last traces of tears from her cheeks, still clutching her science book close. The book's pages were slightly wrinkled now from how tightly she'd been holding it during the ordeal. Through the terminal windows, planes continued taking off into the bright morning sky, the same sky she dreamed of exploring someday. The Rock remained present, his tall figure casting a protective shadow. He watched carefully as Officer Chen took control of the situation, making sure the resolution would be fair and complete. Other travelers stopped to witness this moment, many nodding in approval at how things were being handled now. "Officer Thompson," the supervisor said firmly, "please step aside. We'll be having a detailed discussion about this incident, and you'll be required to undergo immediate retraining." Her words were measured but left no room for argument. Officer Thompson moved away from the checkpoint, his earlier bravado completely deflated. Maya's mother was still recording, but her hand had relaxed slightly. "Thank you," she said to both The Rock and Officer Chen, her voice steady despite the emotion of the moment. "It's important that these incidents are addressed properly, not just for us, but for everyone who might face similar treatment." Officer Chen nodded solemnly. "We're going to review all the footage, including your recordings. This will be used in our training programs to ensure nothing like this happens again." She turned to Maya, who was now standing a little straighter, her NASA shirt catching the morning light. The crowd around them had grown quieter, but their presence remained supportive. An elderly couple nearby smiled encouragingly at Maya. A group of young students who had witnessed everything gave her thumbs up, their own phones still capturing this moment of accountability and change. "Would you like to come with me?" Officer Chen asked Maya and her mother. We can process your security screening at a different checkpoint, and I'll personally ensure you have plenty of time to reach your gate. Her genuine concern was evident in every word and gesture. Maya looked up at her mother, then at the rock, who gave her an encouraging nod. The fear that had gripped her earlier was fading, replaced by something stronger. A sense that standing up for what's right, even when it's scary, was part of reaching for the stars. As they prepared to move to another checkpoint, other TSA officers were already working to reorganize the line, their movements more conscientious, their treatment of passengers noticeably more respectful. The morning's events had clearly left an impression on everyone working there. The sunlight streaming through the terminal windows seemed brighter now, creating a gentle glow around Maya as she walked beside her mother and Officer Chen. Her science book was still in her hands, but she held it differently now, not as a shield, but as a symbol of dreams that couldn't be diminished by prejudice. Behind them, the rock watched them go, knowing that sometimes the biggest impacts come from standing up for what's right in small moments. The crowd of witnesses began to disperse, but the lesson of that morning would stay with them. A reminder that courage comes in all sizes, and justice sometimes needs a helping hand to prevail. As Officer Chen began leading Maya and her mother to another checkpoint, the rock took a few quick steps forward. "Wait," he called out softly. "Can I have a moment?" The supervisor nodded, and everyone paused as the famous actor knelt down to Maya's eye level, his massive frame somehow making the gesture even more meaningful. The morning light from the terminal windows caught the silver NASA letters on Maya's shirt, making them shimmer slightly. The rock noticed her hands were still trembling a bit as they held her beloved science book, its pages showing the wear of frequent reading. "That's a pretty cool shirt you've got there," he said, his voice gentle and warm. "You know, when I was a kid, I had big dreams too. And sometimes, people tried to tell me what I couldn't do, where I didn't belong." He paused, making sure Maya was looking at him directly. The busy airport seemed to fade into the background as he continued. "But here's something I learned. Those people who try to put limits on your dreams, they're just scared. Scared of how bright you can shine, scared of how far you can go." His words carried the weight of personal experience, touching everyone within earshot. Maya's grip on her book loosened slightly as she listened. Nearby passengers had stopped to watch this intimate moment, many discreetly wiping tears from their eyes. Even the usually hurried airport staff slowed down, drawn in by the power of what was unfolding. "I saw how brave you were just now," the rock continued, gesturing to her NASA shirt. "Standing tall, staying polite, even when someone wasn't being fair to you. That's not just courage. That's the kind of strength that takes people to the stars." A small smile began to form on Maya's face as he spoke about space, her earlier tears now completely dried. Her mother watched with grateful eyes, her phone still recording this unexpected moment of kindness and wisdom. "You remind me of something really important," the rock said, pointing to the space shuttle illustration on her book's cover. "Those astronauts up there, they don't just explore space. They show us that the sky isn't the limit. It's just the beginning." He reached out and gently tapped the NASA logo on her shirt. "Every time you wear this shirt, I want you to remember today. Not because someone tried to make you feel small, but because you stood tall. Because you showed everyone here what real courage looks like." The terminal had grown quiet, with even the usual airport announcements seeming to pause for this moment. Other children in the terminal watched wide-eyed as their action movie hero talked about dreams and courage with a little girl who loved space. And you know what else? The rock's voice carried a hint of playful conspiracy. "I bet those astronauts would be pretty proud to have someone like you wearing their shirt. Because brave people like you, you're the ones who help make the world better by standing up to unfairness." Maya's eyes sparkled now, the fear from earlier replaced by something stronger. Hope, mixed with determination. "Thank you," she whispered, her voice small but clear. The rock smiled warmly, the kind of smile that reached all the way to his eyes. As he stood up, the regular airport buzz slowly returned, but something had changed. The other passengers watching seemed to stand a little straighter, hold their heads a little higher. Maya's mother mouthed a silent thank you as Officer Chen prepared to lead them to their new checkpoint. The morning sun continued to stream through the terminal windows, but now it seemed to follow Maya as she walked. Her NASA shirt no longer just a piece of clothing, but a symbol of dreams that couldn't be grounded by anyone's prejudice or fear. The Rock watched them go, knowing that sometimes the biggest victories happen in the smallest moments when someone chooses to stand up and say, "This is not okay." Officer Chen led Maya and her mother to a quieter security checkpoint, where the staff had already been briefed on the situation. The morning sunlight streamed through the windows, casting a warm glow on Maya's NASA shirt as she walked confidently beside her mother, her science book now held loosely at her side instead of clutched to her chest. "I want to personally apologize again," Officer Chen said, her voice filled with genuine concern and professionalism. "What happened today was completely unacceptable." She paused, taking a moment to look directly at Maya and her mother. "We're going to make sure this becomes a learning moment for our entire staff." The new security checkpoint felt different, calmer, more respectful. The officers there smiled warmly as they efficiently processed Maya and her mother through the screening. One officer even commented on Maya's NASA shirt, sharing that his daughter also dreamed of becoming an astronaut. "We're implementing immediate changes," Officer Chen explained as they walked. "Officer Thompson has been removed from direct passenger interaction and will undergo extensive retraining in cultural sensitivity and proper screening protocols." She spoke clearly, wanting them to know that their experience was being taken seriously. Maya's mother nodded, her phone now tucked away. "Thank you for handling this properly," she said. "It's important that other families don't have to go through what we experienced today." Her voice was steady, carrying the strength of someone who knew they'd helped create positive change. Around them, the airport continued its usual bustle, but there was something different in the air. Other passengers who had witnessed the earlier incident gave encouraging smiles as they passed by. A group of pilots walking past noticed Maya's NASA shirt and gave her a thumbs up. Officer Chen pulled out her business card and handed it to Maya's mother. "I'd like to stay in touch about the changes we'll be implementing. Your experience today will help us create better training programs." She paused, looking at Maya. "And we want to make sure every child who passes through our airport feels safe and respected." A young TSA officer approached with their carry-on bags, which had been carefully screened. "Everything's all set," she said warmly. "And Maya, I saw your space science book. That's the same one my niece loves." The simple comment brought a bright smile to Maya's face. As they gathered their belongings, Officer Chen continued explaining the next steps. "We'll be reviewing all security protocols, updating our training materials, and implementing new oversight measures." She spoke with determination, making it clear that this incident would lead to real changes. Maya listened while putting her science book back in her backpack, standing a little taller now. The morning's events had shown her something important, that speaking up against unfairness could lead to positive change, just like the scientists in her books who questioned old ways of thinking. "We'll also be sending a formal letter of apology," Officer Chen added, "but more importantly, we'll be using this as a case study in our staff training. Your courage today will help protect other families from similar experiences." Her words carried the weight of genuine commitment. The regular airport announcements continued overhead, but they seemed to blend into the background of this important moment. Other security staff nearby worked with renewed awareness, their interactions with passengers noticeably more considerate and respectful. As they prepared to head to their gate, Maya turned to Officer Chen. "Will other kids still get to dream about space when they come through here?" she asked, her voice small but clear. The supervisor knelt down to Maya's level, just as the Rock had done earlier. "Because of you, Maya," Officer Chen replied with a warm smile, "they'll know that their dreams can take them anywhere, even to the stars. The words hung in the air, a promise of change that had started with one brave little girl in a NASA shirt who refused to let unfairness go unchallenged. 3 weeks after the airport incident, Maya sat at her desk in her bedroom, working on her science homework. The walls around her were covered with space posters, and her NASA shirt, now even more special to her, hung proudly on a hook by her door. The afternoon sun streamed through her window, making the model solar system hanging from her ceiling cast dancing shadows on her walls. The doorbell rang, and she heard her mother call up the stairs, "Maya, honey, there's a package for you." Curious, Maya rushed downstairs, her sock-covered feet sliding slightly on the wooden floor. On the kitchen counter sat a large envelope with official-looking logos. "It's from Dwayne Johnson's office," her mother said, smiling knowingly. Maya's eyes widened as she carefully opened the package, her hands trembling with excitement. Inside, she found a glossy photograph of the rock, but it wasn't just any promotional picture. The photo showed him wearing a NASA shirt similar to hers, standing in front of a space exhibit. His familiar smile was warm and encouraging, but it was the handwritten message across the bottom that made Maya's eyes fill with happy tears. "To my brave friend Maya, keep reaching for the stars. They belong to everyone. Stay strong, The Rock." But there was more in the package. Underneath the photo was a letter on official NASA letterhead. Maya's mother watched as her daughter's hands shook while unfolding it. The letter was from a female astronaut who had heard about what happened at the airport. "Dear Maya," the letter began, "we heard about your courage at LAX Airport. Your story reached us here at NASA, and we want you to know that space exploration needs brave people like you. People who stand up for what's right and never let anyone dim their dreams." Maya sat down at the kitchen table, carefully reading every word. The astronaut shared her own stories of facing challenges and overcoming them, of people who said she couldn't achieve her dreams, and how she proved them wrong. At the bottom of the letter was an invitation to visit NASA's facilities when she was in the area. The package also contained something else, a small blue patch, identical to the ones astronauts wear on their suits, with Maya's name embroidered on it. A note attached read, "For our future colleague, the stars are waiting for you." As Maya held the patch, her mother's phone buzzed with a notification. The video of what had happened at the airport had sparked important conversations about treating everyone with respect. News articles reported that airports across the country were updating their training programs, using the incident as an example of what needed to change. Maya walked back up to her room, carefully pinning the photo and letter on her bulletin board. She touched the NASA logo on her shirt hanging by the door, remembering the rock's words about being brave. The afternoon sun caught the patch in her hands, making it sparkle like a star. Sitting back at her desk, Maya opened her science book again, but now with renewed determination. The model solar system above her cast shifting shadows across her homework as she wrote about the properties of distant planets. But she wasn't just writing about space anymore. She was writing about her future. On her desk, next to her pencils and calculator, she placed the patch where she could see it while she worked. It reminded her that standing up for what's right, even when it's scary, was just as important as any scientific formula she could learn. As the sun began to set outside her window, Maya smiled, knowing that her dream of reaching the stars had only grown stronger. Sometimes, she realized, the bravest thing you can do is simply be yourself and stand up for what you believe in, whether you're in an airport terminal or floating among the stars. The future astronaut turned back to her homework, her heart full of hope and determination. After all, as both The Rock and that NASA patch reminded her, the stars belong to everyone who is brave enough to reach for them.